It's a great honour to present today at the International Expo here. I'm Jenny Smith. I've been a midwife for many years, and a project that came around in the 2000s with my two colleagues, Professor Fisk and Felicity Platt. Professor Fisk, who's an obstetrician, and Felicity Platt, a anaesthetist at Queen Charlotte's Hospital, where we sort of got together and thought, let's try and improve caesarean section birth for women. And that's really how it all began. This is actually a quality improvement project, and that's how it all started, not as any great research. We just got on with it, and we thought we'll try and emulate as far as possible a normal birth with caesarean section. Of course, in time, we were very badly hit with, as I will show some of the slides, on the aspect of natural. However, it did get the interest to go forward, and indeed a lot of people are now doing various forms of the technique. So just very briefly, just looking at the background, what's involved, some of the critics we had, modifications of the technique that are now ongoing, and how it fits with the obstetric enhanced recovery programs, and where next. So we know, and some of the other speakers have been saying today, we've had an astronomical increase across the world, really from sort of a 5% caesarean section rate in some areas, and now hitting 27.5 overall in the UK, and in some areas obviously 40%, and even higher in places like Brazil and certain parts of India. So this is definitely not sitting here saying we're going to increase caesarean sections, we've got this new way of having a baby without anything else. This is for women who need to have caesarean sections, and I'm sure there'd be far more discussions at other points about why people have caesarean sections. So just moving on. So though in the past, in the 70s to 2000s, we were very much looking at vaginal delivery, increasing women's choice, non-clinical environments, particularly in our birth centres, which have developed dramatically with double beds, no beds pulling down from the walls, very low lighting, moving around, use of water, and early skin-to-skin, early breastfeeding, and a lot of input from the partner or their birth partners, doulas, and everything else. However, we always get a little bit skewed because in some ways we're thinking, in birth centres it's about 5% of the UK population. Home births are 2%. So actually, mainstream labour wards are 93%. So most of our women are on mainstream labour wards, and this is an area that we believed at the time needs some reform. So very ritual-driven caesareans, full surgical environment. There has been shifts from GA to epidurals in the past. Background music was starting. Fathers were getting a little bit more involved. Breastfeeding still was very low, skin-to-skin very low. Poor maternal satisfaction, and it indeed really in the 1980s, it wasn't until we brought the men in. I mean, they weren't there when I was early in my career, and the subfertility. So of course, very helpfully with the Cochrane early skin-to-skin contact for mothers and babies, we know it improves breastfeeding rates. We know it improves duration of breastfeeding. We know it reduces infant crying as soon as the mother goes skin to skin, that's pure skin on top of the mother, and increases the maternal attachment, affection, particularly in caesarean section. As soon as the baby's out, the baby is with the mother, and the mother forgets about the sewing up because she's just looking at her baby, and the rest of the surgery seems, providing it's all uncomplicated, goes very smoothly after that. So this study with the Sean team, where they put in a skin-to-skin method in their operating theatre, and as you see on this graph, the top, it doesn't really matter how many members of the team are there. We've actually got skin-to-skin at vaginal birth really good. It sits there at 90%. It doesn't matter if your team numbers go down. What they did was they sort of put in caesarean section, the natural technique or the gentle technique of cesarean section, and it wasn't like they quite got the whole team joined up. So what was very, very good was their delayed cord clamping. Excellent, everyone adopted that. But the difficulty was who's going to look after the baby, and they sort of had an extra person sort of put in just to do that bit, and it's a bit sort of nurse midwife in this paper, American paper. However, and then they thought, oh, the mother needs to see the baby, what about contamination? And they had a screen that you couldn't see, but then it became a plastic screen so the mother could see. And, you know, after that, the difficulty was that this additional person they put into theatre wasn't always around, so they sold it to the hospital. Everyone can have this type of family-centred caesarean. And then what they realised was women are asking for it all over the place, but they couldn't always deliver it because there wasn't the staffing. However, they did see that their breastfeeding rates went up, and the women absolutely loved it. Going on to a psychological paper, this was quite an interesting study in 2008 where they actually looked, I don't know how people decided to sort of get involved in this, because they put the mother in an MRI at sort of 2 to 4 weeks after the birth, and they compared 6 caesarean section mothers with 6 normal birth mothers. And what they saw was that when they played different cries of babies, the cries of someone else's baby didn't particularly register differently across the two groups, but when they did their own baby cry, they found that the mother's brain was more stimulated to their own baby cry if they had a normal birth rather than the caesarean. And I'm sure when we think about bonding and psychology and women being with their babies and not being separated, I'm sure there's a lot more to this, but obviously this was a sort of hypothesis they put forward, and that's what they're finding in a very small group. It's 2 to 4 weeks after birth. So this was our paper back in 2008. Before this paper, we'd had a bit in The Guardian about this natural cesarean techniques. There was quite a bit of media creeping up through baby magazines even before this. But then we sort of put it into the paper, and the main points were parental participation, auto-resuscitation, i.e. the baby's head comes out like a normal birth, the baby's fluid drains out, and it's a slow delivery of the baby, just like we have head, shoulders following, and we take it slowly at the time of the birth. And then direct skin to skin and breastfeeding. So obviously what we did to prepare women prior to this was we showed them, actually at the time we sort of took them to look through the theatre glass in the early time, and then eventually we had a film. They had their own music they played. They put on their own tops after the epidural was put in, and then we talked about putting the saturation monitor on their foot, the ECGs on the side, and the fact that if they had a gown or their own clothing, we moved it so the baby could go straight into the mother's arms. And so we just kept that arm free. So everything was sort of set up prior to the birth. Again at Queen Charlotte's. So the beginning of a caesarean section starts as normal. We drop the drape. It's initially there's quite a bit more development on drapes, but basically we just sat the mother further up and then drop the drape down here. But you have to make sure the mother is high enough up she actually sees her baby, or she's got this sort of drape. The other thing is to keep her hands on the right side of the drape for the sterility. And then the father may stand, and this is obviously a very excited father there as the baby's head was coming out. And it really does make the whole of the professional team become a family. We really are interacting with a family, with the professional family, and we've had amazing amount of births and excitement with this. And this is another mother with the baby just coming up, seeing the baby again, and then often facing the mother. Now this is quite interesting. When I was speaking to David earlier, we normally take from the baby's head to the body right out is about 2 to 3 minutes. And obviously, as you take the baby's head slightly up here, you want to make sure you're not getting this drainage of David's 20 mils of blood he was discussing. But what I was thinking, well, actually, we do keep the baby quite horizontal before we show the mummy. So in a way, I think we sort of achieved the main rush of the cord blood before that. And then, of course, the parents can see the sex of the baby if they don't know what the baby is, which is just here. And, it can be very exciting. And we usually are very quiet if the parents don't know the sex of the baby. We think, we're not going to say anything and let them find themselves. So the walking the baby out was very much, the incision and the little baby's head out, and then you just wait for the baby to slowly wriggle out. It is, of course, enhanced a little bit with the oxytocin when you get the 5 units of oxytocin, which the anaesthetist tends to give, and that will give the baby a little surge as well if it's taking a little bit longer, but it can be up to 3 minutes. And you see the baby with the fluid coming out, very, often really quite robustly. And I think the other thing that I find is quite interesting, again, we probably need more research, is actually having the restriction on the baby's chest, which probably is a bit more like a normal birth in terms of expelling the fluid. And I think if we take it all a bit slower, babies will be having greater drainage of the lungs. And so, as you can see with this baby, this baby is beginning to cry when the rest of the body is still inside the uterus with the cord blood still pulsating. And then, of course, the immediate skin to skin. Often we put a hat, you've got the towel, and then often we've also got a bit of bubble wrap over the top as well. You do need operating theatres at about 25 degrees or you will get cold babies, but as long as we're doing that, it's fine. And this actual baby, with a wonderful obstetrician friend of mine, started to feed. She said, gosh, baby is breastfeeding, and it was. It's quite difficult sometimes to get, obviously, that with the angle. And the slow bit we called walking the baby out, as the parents were just seeing there. So this is one of the times of the filming. It wasn't the first one, but is the film coming?
It starts like any normal caesarean. After an epidural, Sherry Tan is ready to have her first baby surgically delivered. This is usually done very rapidly, all hidden behind a screen, but not here. As the baby's head emerges, the parents are able to watch their infant making its own way into the world. A full minute later, and the baby is still only halfway out, and only now decides to wake up and announce its presence. This was a memorable experience for all those present. It takes 3 minutes for the baby, a boy, to be delivered, and he's immediately given to mum. Now, amid all the paraphernalia of an operating theatre, the term natural caesarean may sound like a contradiction, but the aim here today has been to make this invasive form of delivery as untraumatic as possible for both mother and baby. Queen Charlotte says the natural caesarean is now becoming an established procedure at the hospital.
The baby is resuscitated naturally by the contractions of the mother's womb, forcing the lung liquid out. It starts breathing before it's even born, and then establishes early skin-to-skin contact with the mother, which we know increases satisfaction, bonding and breastfeeding rates.
The baby is being named Evan. His parents are delighted with how things went.
It was absolutely wonderful. I couldn't have wanted anything different. Having the baby pass to us so quickly was really nice, because you tend to forget all the interventions really quickly because it just suddenly becomes your own small world.
I think I was actually feeling remarkably calm at the same time, like really happy that I was participating in the whole process.
Other hospitals have expressed interest in natural caesareans, so this novel method of childbirth could eventually become more widely available. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
So that was the Tennicott news back in 2007. Professor Fisk was just saying, you know, the maternal bonding, the slow auto-resuscitation, and the breastfeeding were the key points in his bit that was missed there. So when we first we were actually turned down by one of the journals very strongly, and then we went to BJOG, and these were our reviewers. Both sides absolutely hated it. Unacceptable, risks of infection, tears, dislodged lines, a burden for registrars, difficult for obstetrics, and nothing natural about a cesarean. And I think that has been the line all the time, nothing natural. But I felt sort of really battered with this when actually you come up with an idea which actually did take the media attention. We knew it might get a little bit complex, but wow, it was attack on some of the others. And then others said, nothing new. What is it all about? So it was like the two extremes. A bit later on, I have a charity. It's actually officially a charity, but it was a foundation at the time. We put out a further film, which is on YouTube, with Professor Bennett and the team at Queen Charlotte's. So some of the other hits were from Lauren Newman. Women are misled to believe that caesarean section is safest for them. Sanctioning section threatens the health of mothers and babies. Natural misleading as friendly fire. And challenge the ethics of making caesarean nicer. And I think it's quite difficult when you're in this, and I'm a bit of a sensitive person, this was hard hitting. And I think a little bit too hard, because actually, if you talk to a normal mother about a caesarean, I don't think they sit in there thinking they're not having an operation. I think we have to give them a lot of understanding. Of course it's surgery, but let's make it much nicer, the parents and the family much more involved, and the team. So next hit. We've actually come up with a product, and now we're punching it twice. We've got the technology, and we're reframing it and making a natural solution of something that is completely abnormal. Language and images to describe vaginal birth consistently labeled as dangerous and an insignificant event in a woman's life are spun so unashamedly spun together to sell caesarean section. So there we go. Since that time, there's been a lot of sort of editorials around different hospitals trying to do different things with the technique, some of which is the same as we'd originally written, and sometimes it's a little bit different. And then the Times and some of the other papers, NHS heads for natural caesareans. This was an article in 2016 that actually was thinking about, 10 minutes, okay, thinking about doing a randomized controlled trial, and it never actually happened. It was talking about that. And I think why it didn't happen was because once you have a treatment that women really want and it's not unsafe, it actually, you can't do the study because we've shown that it's actually safe and women want it. So it was difficult in the UK. I think it would be very difficult to do a randomized controlled trial. Media, loads of articles, women, their experiences, putting them on YouTube. This was the only randomized controlled trial, and it was a very small trial, but basically the breastfeeding rates and the satisfaction rates were fine. Most of the women actually had previous caesareans. These are all healthy. All these caesareans up until this point were sort of healthy babies, greater than 37 weeks. Indication was mainly repeat caesarean. And then there's another couple of studies. The first one, the neonatal one, was basically a retrospective study, and it looked at, and it was talking about neonatal risk. But what they were doing they looked at the two groups of the traditional caesarean and the family-centered caesarean, and they put SATS monitors on babies' feet. And they hadn't done it on the other group. So then they said there was a number of babies that went because the SATs were low. And then actually at the end of everything, they said, well, probably we're doing the SATs too early. We need to do them at about 5 minutes, when of course they'd come from 62 to 90. So there was sort of a bit of that. I'm just seeing. So that was 92 family caesareans with a cohort of 71 historical. And they just had a few more admissions, but there was no, there was no difference in terms of bad outcomes for babies or babies that stayed admitted for long. The other one was looking conventional caesarean and family-centred, and they found, this is the second study, 285 women in the skin-to-skin group and 365 in the conventional group. They found no difference in any admissions to neonatal unit. They found that the length of the caesarean section was a little bit longer, 4 minutes 42, but adverse outcomes were not increased. And so they were continuing to go and look at this in the future. We did some, at the same time, not that we really talked about it much, but there were women who wanted it regardless, and in emergency caesarean, even back in the day, we were doing failure to progress when the heart rates were fine. And this is one of the woman's comments. I had a natural labour followed by a natural emergency caesarean. Indeed, we did twins, and I phoned this woman up and I said, can I have your picture, this is the first one, of the twins? And she said, yes, Jenny, they're 16. And I suddenly realised, my gosh, 16, and one of them wants to be a midwife, so that's really good. Fits very well with enhanced recovery, about getting people feeling much more normal. After the caesarean, getting drips out quickly, 6 hours, catheters out, walking around, and all the rest of chewing gum afterwards, get their bowels moving, and the whole sort of fits. It does actually fit well with that. Discussion points, William Kaman, I spoke to him to get this picture out there. They're using the drape more. I'm sort of in two minds, because obviously there's a clear, they have this one on the top first and then this one at the top. So they strip down the opaque one and then they have the clear one. But the baby doesn't go directly to the mother this way. And indeed, with some of the studies, sometimes the baby goes in a trolley thing before it actually goes up to the mother. And I'm not sure why, if the baby's absolutely fine. I also spoke to Andy Sims the other day. It was so lovely. And he's got a really lovely film on his Nottingham site. And he sometimes gives the hand mirror to the mother to watch the birth. If the cord is long enough, they put the baby straight up to the mother and the dad cuts the cord and the baby is born into the operating pouch. So that's something else to think about. I think some of the points that one has to consider is if you make the scar too small, actually then you need to do a forceps delivery. So it is a little bit of a wrangle between size of scar and cosmetic look of scar and how wide the scar to get the baby easily out a bit more normally. So these are some of the points there. If you give the oxytocin, obviously that will give the baby a little push down more to help it wriggle through. And indeed, in Australia, they're now talking about long gauntlet gloves where the mother completely scrubs up, puts these gloves on, and the surgeon hands her the baby straight away. And that's the bit from Australia. So conclusions, it's possible, it's popular, it's certainly gone global with a lot of media stuff. It fits with enhanced recovery. It seems to be absolutely safe. The breastfeeding rates are good. The women like it. And I would say that I think, probably, and I can't prove any of this, but I think stress and trauma of women with caesarean, it's become much more family-centred and less traumatic. And I think we should be putting it on the checklist, on our WHO checklist, saying, have you asked the mother, does she want skin to skin? Because we know that breastfeeding is best, so I would like to push that forward. And finally, I've always been a great believer in trying to improve labour wards. And I did write a chapter for someone about this. So we've great now caesarean sections coming in, we've got birth centres really well, but we maybe need to look at more family-centred births on our labour wards, use birth pools for high-risk births, increase mobility, rethink about episiotomy with every birth when their skin is very stretchy, and we still sometimes do that, reduce the stress of families in high-risk births, anti and postnatal wards. How many times I see people nearly collapsing, the dads, they're in 6-bay areas, they've got 12 people in a 6-bay area plus the staff. Everyone is falling over each other. It's not conducive to relaxing anti or post sleep, never mind everything else. double beds, why not some on the other side in our more high-risk areas, and adjustments from home to home. Much more we need to do to make it family-centred. They can pop in and get a cup of tea, and much more home from home. And thank you very much.